All right, good afternoon. It's 12:01. Let's get started. Thank you for joining this webinar. Jessica, first, can you hear me all right?
I sure can.
Awesome, thank you. So today our webinar hosted by New Resources Consulting, in partnership with the State of Wisconsin Star Office, Jessica. We will be talking about year-end processing, specifically PO rollover. This is a process that will allow you to roll your remaining encumbrance to the next budget period. PO rollover. How will you do your PO rollover? There is some preparation you'll want to do before you start your PO rollover and how to clean it up afterwards. And then also the lessons learned and success story for the State of Wisconsin Star Office. And then we'll close it out with some questions. So my name is Matthew Poupitch, Senior Consultant with the Enterprise Solutions Group, New Resources Consulting. Been doing this for almost 10 years, and 5 of those years have been in implementation with the State of Wisconsin of their PeopleSoft 92 environment. So a lot of experience over there, and primarily focused on supply chain financials area, and learned a lot. So, and then with us, we have Jessica Harlan, ERP Business Analyst Senior, the STAR Program Office at the state. So Jessica, can you do a little introduction?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me again today. Again, my name is Jessica Harlan. I am a business analyst for the STAR Program Office in the Procurement Office side of the house. And before I get too far down the road, I'm getting just a little bit of feedback, Matt, on your sound. So I'm hoping that everything is good on your end, that you can hear me. I've been with the state since 2006. I came in at a time when they were kind of reinventing the wheel in procurement, and I was able to move around to several different agencies, including the university, and handle a number of complex procurements. And then roundabout, I believe in 2016, just after the ERP implementation for PeopleSoft, I was co-opted into the STAR office and eventually became an employee there, and had the good fortune of meeting Matt and sitting right next to him and asking him, probably dozens of questions every 10 minutes or so. And he was very patient and answering those. And here we are today. Over to you, Matt.
Awesome. It was great. It was great working with you and everyone over at the State of Wisconsin. Great organization. They really make the most of PeopleSoft and leverage as much functionality as they have to offer. Is my sound a little better? I noticed I was having some bad, slow internet.
It is.
If it ever is cutting out, please let me know.
All right.
The joy of the pandemic era. Great. All right. So let's kind of get into it. So what is PO rollover? It is a delivered process from PeopleSoft. It's a program that will close and cancel existing PO distribution lines with unspent money. So remaining dollars on a PO distribution line that hasn't been vouchered or used on a invoice. So what it can do is it'll close that partially vouchered PO distribution line, or cancel it if it's never been vouchered at all. So if that distribution line hasn't been touched at all, it'll cancel it entirely. And what it's going to do, it's going to create a new distribution line for the unspent dollars with the budget date of the user's choosing. So if you have a one-line PO with one distribution line for $100 and it's been vouchered for 50 already, it's going to close and cancel that first line and create a new distribution line in the new budget period for $50. So it's just creating a brand new line and reducing the original line down to the amount that was vouchered. And if it hasn't been vouchered, it makes it 0. We have the option to liquidate the encumbrance from the prior budget period or not. If you want to leave it there for reporting purposes, you can. And then you'll re-encumber the funds in the new budget period. Here's an example of a PO roll. I think this really helps just visualize what's happening. And here it's kind of what I just said. You know, you have a PO distribution line for $100. It was vouchered for $10, which leaves $90 still encumbered. So when you roll this purchase order, it's going to close that line. It's going to reduce its amount down to $10, give it a remaining encumbrance of 0, and it's going to create a secondary line for the $90, the remaining encumbrance, which has a voucher amount of 0, and it's going to re-encumber that for $90. And the first line was in 2017. The new line will be in 2018. So that's a nice little visual representation of what will be happening. PO rollover activities. You first have a PO roll view that identifies your POs that fall in the criteria of what can be rolled or can't be. You have a workbench where you can identify select POs that you want to roll, and then a PO roll 1 process, which will close or cancel existing. It's going to reduce that amount down to what's been vouchered. It's going to stage a new distribution line for the remaining unvouchered amount, and it's going to change that budget status to not checked. The mid-roll 2 is going to liquidate that encumbrance from the lines that already existed. So whatever encumbrance was out there is going to move that down to 0. Roll 2, create a new distribution line from the staged information, and then whatever new lines were added to your PO, you're going to encumber them in the post roll. So that's high level. We could drill into these one by one. So the start PO roll is the PO roll view run control page. This is where you're going to identify, the business unit you want to roll. You're going to assign it a search ID over here on the right-hand side. You give it whatever you want. And when you run this program, based on the criteria defined below, and popular thing to define is the budget date range you want to address, but you could define chart fields and so forth. But when you run it, it's going to look through and identify POs that meet this criteria, and it's going to associate them to this search ID and business unit. So that in the next step, you can review what did this PO roll view find. One thing to note is you could run this PO roll view process several times, and it's going to purge the data that was associated to the search ID in prior runs and reestablish it with the new set of data. So if you're like cleansing data or cleaning up, you could run it, review, run it again, and make sure that what you cleansed is now reflected as you would want to see. And then I also have an exception report over here. This could show you things that are not qualified to roll. And a quick example of it is right here, purchase order unqualified for PO roll. There are several types of exceptions, but we found that these are some of the most popular. Invalid budget status for a voucher, invalid budget status for a PO. So this is pointing out that a PO won't roll because an associated transaction is not in the right status. I have a PO that looks good and dandy, but its associated PO is not budget checked, or the PO itself is not budget checked. Or maybe my PO is associated to a requisition that's not budget checked. There's a lot of reasons. Now, not every thing that's going to hold the PO up will show up on this report. There are several reasons that a PO will not, but that's just a helpful thing.
All right. And then, once you've created your views, you're able to go onto the PO rollover workbench and select the business unit, and then that will bring up the search ID options. So if you've created potentially more than one search ID, you'll see those. Otherwise, you'll just see the search ID per business unit that you've created. Once you run your search, it will bring in all of the purchase orders that were found by that search, including those that were disqualified if you checked that criteria. And so the nice thing about bringing in disqualified POs into the search criteria is that you're able to click on that link all the way to the right, and that will identify and give you some further details about why those purchase orders might be disqualified. In there, you would also potentially see items, for example, if a purchase order had a receipt against it that was only partially vouchered, while those items typically do not show up in the disqualified PO report, those will be on there letting you know that those purchase orders are unable to be selected for the roll process. And so once you select the purchase orders that you like, you can click Save to mark them as pending. And then those will be eligible to go on to roll 1. Anything to add to that?
Maybe we could comment on the prior year encumbrance open close buttons to distinguish whether the prior year encumbrance will remain open or close after the roll completes. It's these two buttons down at the bottom.
Okay.
So when you
for the state, I don't use those, so I'd have to refer to you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So over at the state, you guys like to liquidate your prior year encumbrances and it's all clean. But if you wanted to keep your prior year encumbrance open for reporting purposes, when you select the POs that you want to roll, if you click prior year encumbrance open, it's going to make this checkbox yes. And that way, as you go through the roll, as you'll see as we go here, that's going to indicate what will liquidate the prior year encumbrance on that purchase order. Yeah, that's good there.
And all of those POs will then be available in the PO rollover TBL record.
Correct. Yes, good point. So once you add them, you could query the PO rollover TBL. Over here on the PO rollover 1, once you have everything selected in your PO rollover workbench that you want to roll, you could run PO rollover 1, and you're going to define the business unit, the budget to roll from, so the date range of transactions you want to select for the roll, and then you define the destination budget date, the budget to roll date. So you're essentially going to be able to take everything from one budget period and put it into the next. And when that new distribution line gets created, it's going to get created with that budget date in the budget to roll date. Finalized requisitions is a good action to take to, stop your requisition or any changes to your requisition to re-encumbering anything or pre-encumbrance, whatnot. So I think it's always a good idea to have that selected. And this information, when you run PO roll 1, it's doing a handful of things. First, it's going to stage your new distribution lines into a staging record, PO rollover STG. It's going to say if you had a one-line PO, one distribution line PO, that record is going to show distribution line 2 for a dollar amount of the unvouchered amount. It's going to reduce your existing line, so your PO line 1 in this example, it's going to reduce that amount down to your previously expensed amount. And it's going to update your budget status to not checked, so that because you're doing it this way, you're liquidating. It's going to require you to do a budget check to liquidate those encumbrances. And lastly, that existing PO line will be canceled or closed. Canceled if it was never vouchered, closed if it was partially vouchered. Anything you'd like to add, Jessica?
Yeah, definitely. When we're putting items into our staging record, at that point, the state can sometimes then use that staging record in order to update any sort of chart field changes that we'd like to make. And that's a nice trick that we've used over the years in order to move everything off of a previous chart string combination and onto a new chart string combination without having to create all new PO lines.
Yes, that's right. That's a perfect place to do it because everything that's in that staging record is what's going to be put on the brand new purchase order line created. So if you manipulate it in the middle of this process, it's just going to get added. And it's only one record, so it makes it really nice, easy to update.
Mm-hmm. So then after you're done with the PO roll 1, you would be running the mid-roll budget check. And the biggest significance about this process is that you're checking the value for the mid-roll status. And it's just as simple as that. It's going to go ahead and validate the budget for everything that you have selected and processed through roll 1. And then it's going to push those items on so that you could advance to roll 2 in the next step. The one thing to note about this process, though, is that items, on occasion can become stuck in mid-roll processing. And one of the most common reasons why you might get items stuck in the mid-roll budget check process is because you have a chart field status equal to recycle. And that's when you have potentially, an invalid chart field combination. And even though you might have had a budget header status of valid, that recycle status is then going to change your post-doc status on the header from Y to N and make it ineligible to be budget checked, to be processed through. And so when items get stuck there, unfortunately, once you kind of process them through, it can be very difficult to change that recycle status because that is going to be associated typically to a closed distribution line, that line having been closed through the roll process, and it's not available to be reopened after that. So, for those of you who are doing some data cleansing prior to PO roll, it's very important to check those chart field status and see if you have anything set to recycle, or if you have a post-doc status at the header that has a status of N. And so those items will be caught in the mid-roll process. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add that a plug to what you're referring to is a pre-roll, like a test, and we call them mock rolls. And there are things that are difficult to fix once this process is started, and we're going to get into it in a bit, but just the value of doing mock rolls to identify problem areas and clean it up in production so that when you actually do the roll, you don't encounter them. And sure, there's the possibility that something pops up the day of that's gonna, but at least you've mitigated the bulk.
Right. Much better to be dealing with 1 or 2 transactions that have an issue rather than several hundred that could have been easily identified prior to.
Yes. Yep. And lastly, if anything gets any purchase order that's a part of the roll that doesn't go to a valid status or is in recycled or whatnot, it's not PO roll 2, the next step is not going to be able to process it. So you need to resolve those mid-roll budget check issues in order to move on. And moving on is PO rollover 2. So this is going to take the information that was staged in PO roll 1 and insert it onto your purchase order as a brand new distribution line. it's going to flip that PO budget status back to not checked so that you could budget check and encumber the funds in the new year. And also a good note for this process is PO rollover DTL is a great record because this is the best record to review what rolled and where it rolled. So you could see that line 1 rolled to line 2 for an amount of with these chart fields. So it's a great report to share with your users, like, hey, this is what rolled, this is how much rolled, and get those stats and make sure things rolled properly. And another thing, Jessica, you might want to speak to it, but I'll just try to do my best at it, is there are bugs with anything, but related to PO roll, there is a bug that it will appear in this PO rollover DTL record that a line rolled, but it didn't. So if you have a 2-line purchase order, 2 distribution lines, and only line 2 rolls, because it met the criteria back at the very beginning of the PO roll view. Sometimes line 1 and 2 will appear in the rollover detail to say line 1 went to line 3 and line 2 went to line 4, when in actuality, only line 2 rolled. So that's, yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we have experienced this when we're doing some chart fill changes and using the roll process to specify a specific chart field on our purchase orders that we would like to roll over, and then use the staging record to update those chart fill values rather than having to create all new PO lines. And so we have discovered this, when we bring in a chart field and a purchase order has more than 1 distribution line on a PO line, so potentially only 1 out of the 3 distribution lines is qualified for the roll and is actually picked up, the PO rollover DTL recorded that the other lines also rolled to new lines, even though they did not exist. So we have been working with Oracle on that bug. It was identified, and a fix is due out very shortly. And then I have another meeting tomorrow to work with a consultant on whether or not we want to pull that correction in prior to the new image that will have the fix available. That's something that we do on occasion. Especially if we are planning on using that process and we want to test and make sure that it's not going to create an issue for us.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that'll something you gotta keep an eye out for.
Mm-hmm. So, after we're done with the roll 1 and 2 process and that mid-roll budget check, we do run the final budget check, the post-PO roll as we call it, but actually it's just a regular budget check process. There's nothing special about it. And that will go ahead and encumber those funds on those new distribution lines. One thing that we do here at the state is, in order to accomplish that, especially if we're rolling and some of those budgets aren't necessarily set up yet, agencies maybe haven't created all of their operating budgets, we will go ahead and lift the controls to track without budget. And then we have a query that we've created that takes all of our chart string values and all of the amounts that are rolled, and we go ahead and send that on to our controller, who then creates the journal entries for those new budgets, and they label them as a roll forward budget. But essentially, they're going ahead and creating then all of those new values and assigning all of the budget authority for the exact amount that rolled, so that they can then very quickly update those budget controls back to a controlled status.
Yes, and that is, key, because PO rollover, it doesn't establish budget authority. If you had $1 million in 2020, you don't have anything yet established in 2021 when you run this budget check, it'll fail. It'll say exceeds budget authority or tolerances, etc. So and also, what is the best way to identify what your budget is? Well, for some people, right, if your budget from the prior year rolls into the new one in addition to your existing budget, well, you could
Mhm.
establish your budget authority in 2021. But if you're allowed to take what was a residual in 2020 and apply it to 21 on top of that, well, you have to have some sort of report to create those encumbrance journals. So just a key of PO roll does not establish your budget authority or add to your budget authority commitment control. And one thing I should have mentioned, this recording will be made available to everybody. If you have any questions, we'll take them at the end. In Teams, you could send in a chat and message us your question. I know this is a lot of content, but in order to keep the webinar moving forward, we have to take the questions at the end. But just, yeah, if you have any questions, plug them into the chat. Sorry, so back to the presentation. This is another slide just to revisit an example of a rolled PO. Does it make more sense, right? So again, in this example, there was a one-line PO that was partially vouchered for $10 of 100. So it closed the first line, reduced its amount down to the amount voucher, which was $10. It liquidated the encumbrance in 2017, and then it added a new row from the staging table and created a line 2 for a distribution amount of what was left was the $90, and then the post-roll budget check after you establish budget authority will encumber it for the full amount in 2018. Now, that is how you run the program to liquidate the prior year encumbrance. If you don't want to liquidate your prior year encumbrance and you want to retain it there for reporting historical purposes, wanting to know how much encumbrance do we have at the end of 2014, 2015, 2016, what's my trend, right? And then you could do some analysis of that to see how that's tracking. You don't do roll 1 mid check or roll 2. You don't do any of that, and all you do is do PO roll open encumbrance. And ultimately what it's going to do, it's going to do everything those other two did, except it's not going to liquidate the prior year encumbrance. So here's an example of that. Everything's the same except remaining encumbrance on line 1 remains 90. So technically this PO, that's a total of $100, is going to have a remaining encumbrance of 180 across all budget periods. But if you look at budget period, 2017 had 90 encumbrance and now 2018 has 90. So if you're going to do that, that's going to have an impact on reporting and how you write up your reports. So we kind of touched on it earlier, but it's really important to prep for PO rollover. Do some mock rolls. There's a lot of data that you're going to want to clean up, but some examples are, closed POs that users don't want to be rolled. Get them out. That way, if you have POs with 10 cents left on them or $1 and that's not really something, it's an opportunity to cleanse your data every year. So closed POs you don't want to roll. Ensure buyers are active on your POs. If you have a PO with an inactive buyer, it won't work. So that's an opportunity to clean up in advance. Ensure POs contain accounting date and open period, right? That could cause a problem as well. Ensure requisitions for associated POs are in open period. So you might have a requisition in the prior year and a PO in the current year that's rolling to the next year. Well, those requisitions have to be cleaned up. And it reviews all transactions associated with that PO, rec, receipt, voucher. POs are in a valid budget status, close POs with incorrect encumbrance balance. There's a bug that we've seen that in commitment control, it's fixed now, but depending on which version of PeopleSoft you're on, that encumbrance balance could be incorrect across ledger groups. So if you run budget check, it will write the encumbrance to one ledger group but not another. Big problem. And then when it vouchers and that vouchers budget checked, it'll liquidate a different budget group, ledger group, but not this one. So it caused a lot of things to get out of sync. And that was not resolved until I want to say like somewhere about 9.2 image 20 or so. So
that sounds right.
Yeah, big.
That was
problems.
a painful year.
Yep, lesson learned. And then post or delete all vouchers associated POs. A voucher can stop a PO from being rolled. Maybe your PO is matched to a voucher, but it's in invalid budget status. Your PO won't be able to roll. And so if your voucher is to be paid and it's appropriately against that PO, just make sure it's posted, because then it's all done, it's good, it's paid, or it will be paid. And if that voucher is not meant to be paid against that PO, have it deleted. So this is a cleansing of data in your system. Yeah, a lot of things. Go ahead.
Yeah, at the state, we use a number of activity checklists, in our what we refer to as a toolkit to help our users prepare and make sure that all of their POs are qualified to be rolled. And when I say qualified, right along this list, making sure that everything's approved, dispatched with a valid budget, and no unposted vouchers. We are continuously monitoring our items and cleansing prior to PO rolls. Additionally, the issue with the inactive buyer is that it won't prevent your purchase order from rolling over, but it will prevent your PO from encumbering during that last budget check process. And so if you're reporting that data to create your budget authority, the data that's reported won't include that encumbrance. So, whoever needs to establish that budget authority will have an incorrect amount recorded there for what needs to be encumbered. And then also, any purchase order with an accounting date in a closed period will not be eligible to be picked up in the PO roll, and you won't necessarily know why. There's not any sort of status that's going to tell you that that's what's happening until you actually go into that individual PO and kind of start to attempt to manipulate the data or make a change, and then you'll see a notification pop up saying that the accounting date is in a closed period. So those are all things to watch out. Here at the state, we're using what Matt referred to earlier as a mock roll, and we use that test data to kind of work with our agencies and our customers to make sure that everything is correct, and that if it's not correct, that they can go into the production system. We also monitor those encumbrance balance issues to make sure that we have the correct encumbrance balance. For example, if a voucher line, if a distribution line was over vouchered on a purchase order, you may have an encumbrance balance issue, and that's something that's going to be carried forward into that PO roll. So you want to make sure and take care of that and get those errant encumbrance balances liquidated and potentially reestablished with the correct balance before you roll it. Because after you roll it, it certainly doesn't make it any easier to go back in and try and clean that up. Additionally, if you have any distribution lines that are fully liquidated, even if they're on a PO line where other chart strings have an encumbrance balance, the PO roll will actually ignore those distribution lines. And so what you'll see is you'll see line 1 that had 0 encumbrance balance remaining in the prior budget period, and then line 2 was rolled to line 3 with the remaining encumbrance balance in the new budget period. And so for those of you who are closing out those old budget periods, well, now you've got a PO line with distribution lines in 2 different budget periods, and you've got to close the entire line in order to reestablish that encumbrance correctly. So those are definitely things to be looking out and making sure that you remedy prior to the PO roll so that you have a good roll experience and you're not doing too much cleanup during the post-roll process.
And Jessica, if I could just add to that, PO distribution lines that are fully liquidated, have nothing left, fully vouchered.
Correct.
You can leverage the PO close process to assist with those closures. The PO close process starts at the distribution line level and works its way up to the PO header. So it can close some PO distribution lines. If all PO distribution lines are closed, it will then close the PO line. If all PO line or PO schedules, if all PO schedules are closed, it'll close the PO line. If all PO lines are closed, it'll close the PO header. So it's a good process to leverage to help clean up prior to your roll.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do have some additional runs of that PO close process, and it will close a qualified distribution line. And when I say qualified, that's one that's both fully liquidated and fully matched. And then, you can set on the parameters a last activity date. So that could be 0 days since the last activity. That could be 5 days, 30 days, whatever it is that entities are comfortable with.
And those activity days are defined in your purchasing definitions.
Good point.
All right. One last thing I just want to point out, post rollover cleanup. Post rollover prep. Something that's important to take a look at is your KK installation options, commitment control installation options. There is a option for budget checking for BP liquidation option. What you want to select is the prior doc budget period. And this issue is common during the start of a new budget period because users can create a requisition in the old budget period and then change that budget period in the PO after it's been sourced. So what I'm referring to is if you have a PO in 2020 and a rec in 2019, that PO won't roll because your requisition's in a closed budget period. So it's important to have this control in prior doc budget period so that it helps with, or I might have that backwards. It should be current doc budget period. So you just don't want it to process it based on your requisition. You want it to process based on your current document, your current PO. So that is KK installation options, BP liquidation option. All right. And then post rollover cleanup. Just as important as a pre-roll preparation cleanup, cleansing the data, you're still going to want to do it after because undoubtedly something's going to get through. Review your PO lines to make sure they rolled properly, rolled with the correct amount and the correct encumbrance. Make sure that the amount and the encumbrance aren't different because that can happen depending on your liquidation method and your distribute by method on your PO distribution line. Roll any POs that were missed. So maybe some POs weren't qualified at the time of the roll for a variety of reasons. You have to fix that problem and then roll that purchase order with a separate process. Close all open requisitions. Recs are now associated to close and cancel distribution lines. So now the rec is eligible to close. So this is opportunity to cleanse your system entirely from rec to check. Validate that unrolled lines did not re-encumber incorrectly in the prior budget period. We noticed this was a problem when a line that never rolled at all re-encumbered, like for the full amount. It was never vouchered at all, or it was fully vouchered, fully liquidated. So you had a $100 PO that was vouchered for $100. It had zero remaining balance. And Jessica, I think you were referring to this earlier. It re-encumbered the full $100 in the prior budget period.
Yeah, and again, that dates back to a prior Oracle bug, but as Matt referred to earlier, depending on which version you're on, this is something that you could experience depending on what images you have adopted.
Yes, yep. Good point. And close your budget period after all prior fiscal year transactions are closed and canceled with valid budget statuses. So once you're all said and done, close it out.
Yeah, here at the state, we actually do a comparison of the GL to KK ledgers to make sure that everything that was liquidated during PO roll in that first budget check matches the amount that was encumbered in the new budget period. And if we have any sort of discrepancy, we trace that down to the document level and to the line level to make sure that we don't have any sort of issue between our ledgers. And since we've adopted this practice, we've been able to validate right down to the penny, with the last couple of PO rolls. Every once in a while, we'll see a few small variances because our matching will go out to 4 decimal places where, we can only expense up to 2. But, I like to tell people, well, I got it reconciled down to 4 pennies. So I'll just give you those 4 pennies and we'll call it a day.
I think that's immaterial enough.
Right. And even then, we can still find those issues in those matching discrepancies. But of course, the ledgers then only reflect the actual expenses.
Perfect. Yeah, that is important. What do we have next? Rollover records. So we've referenced these records earlier. PO rollover stage is key for roll 1. Roll 1 takes what you selected in your workbench to roll and puts the brand new line that will be assigned to your PO in this record. So what you'll see here is this PO 245 had a distribution line 1 that had a residual merchandise amount of $1,000. So what it did here is it staged line 2 for $1,000. That was what was left. So it takes PO roll 2, then takes everything that's in your staging record and puts it into PO line distrib. So your actual PO distribution line record. And then so you could check this out mid-roll and you can see here's all the chart fields that it's going to use. You can manipulate this chart field string, as Jessica mentioned earlier, to maybe you have a chart field that's annual, right? Maybe it's like a something or appropriation that switched at the end of the year and you need to reclass something. You could do that in the middle of the process. And then PO rollover detail. That's a great record to review everything that transpired. What this distribution line for PO 245 line 1 went to PO line 2 for $1,000 amount rolled. And these are the chart fields that it used and everything. So great record to see what happened, what went to what, and then you could validate.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out, stage is a temporary record. And so, while you may see very similar types of data, what's in staging will then disappear, once you've finished out your roll process. And so your PO rollover DTL will be your permanent record of all things that transpired.
Yes, and you hope it's empty at the end. it's a good place to check to make sure that nothing's left in it.
Good point.
Right.
So kind of on to lessons learned. Here at the state, we have really amped up our process. Since coming on to the STAR team, I was tasked with improving the PO roll and year-end close process because there were a couple of rough starts those first 2 years, as would happen with the adoption of any new software, but in particular, a very unfortunate bug that created some discrepancies across the ledger groups. And so, here we have been, using both links to, our finance system as well as our external websites to make sure that our users have up-to-date information, that we're rolling out, detailed communication plans, training, all of that, so that any customer at any time can see that information and know exactly what it is that they need to do. We're also, we maintain a detailed work breakdown structure in our Confluence site, or what's called Confluence, and then we leverage Jira for task assignment and approvals. During our PO roll, we also lock users out over a weekend process so that no user, including any sort of interface that might be coming through, kind of makes any sort of damaging entries into the environment. And so that's, very important for us to, hold any user, any sort of, queries or whatnot, any batch processes that are typically being done during that time period. We put all of that on hold so we can have a very pristine environment to do our work and our reconciliation. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we execute a number of mock rolls in a non-prod environment. And then once we have, some of that initial data testing done, we actually invite our end users into our test environment so that they can look at the data and look at what happened with that, and then make any sort of last-minute changes to the production environment in order to cleanse the data and get as good of a roll process. We also leverage what was originally created as a year-end close work center for our pre and post-roll activities. We have since transitioned that on to be even more than that for those of you who might have had a chance to look at that yesterday. But that's something that, kind of leveraging PeopleSoft and taking that to the next level of data validation and data cleansing activities to let our customers know what it is that needs to happen. And so that even after the roll process, if there's anything in there that they need to make correction, they have immediate notification of what that is. We've also, since enacting PO roll, have had the opportunity to kind of use that process or leverage that process for other items, such as a reorganization or a mass chart fill change. For example, every year we get new federal project IDs, and so we use that for some of those purchase orders that go year over year in order to make that kind of update to the project IDs so that our agencies aren't having to create hundreds of new POs or PO lines in such a short time frame. As I mentioned earlier, there's also the situation where the line amount is not always equal to the encumbrance amount, and that really happens, quite a bit, when some vouchering activity, something's been overexpensed, or potentially a credit has been made, or maybe that voucher was already matched and they realized there's not enough money on the purchase order, so somebody made a change after that matching process and it didn't get rerun. So all of those things can create a scenario where your merchandise minus expenses is not equal to necessarily what you would have remaining encumbrance value. And so we are continuously scouring our distribution lines, looking for that issue to make sure that we have corrected that prior to PO roll. Make sure on an annual basis, at the very least, that that data is very clean. As Matt mentioned earlier, manually establishing that budget authority can take some time. So we have created a variety of queries and put them into a format that can be used for a mass upload of those journal entries, make it much easier for our state controller's office. And we've also lifted those budget controls so that, once those lines are created, even if the budget authority wasn't established prior, it can easily be established after the PO roll. And making sure that, we're kind of watching out for any of those Oracle bugs and, continuously using our test process to look for those items. Are we seeing any sort of an anomaly? Is there anything out of sync between the ledger groups? Looking at a cross comparison of, is everything that's in appropriation matching everything that's in detail, matching everything that's in our operating budgets? And so, we have really upped our game with this process. And, since then, we've been able to really speed up the year-end close and PO roll process. I think if we wanted to move on to the next slide, we could talk about success stories.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick thing.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Jessica, you brought up a good point about the mock rolls and involving the end users. And I just want to add how communication is key to having them in the loop.
Yeah, definitely. Our end users are what make us successful. Their willingness to do the work, because I can, create all the queries I want. I can create all kinds of pretty charts and graphs and send out emails. But if they don't do the actual necessary work, or if they don't understand what it is that needs to be done, it's, much of what I did was just a waste. And so, since adopting a number of these processes and trying to create shortcuts or tools for our users to make it easier for them to do that, we've really seen an increase in participation from our end users. And not only are they doing the work, but they seem rather pleased to be able to get it done. We've broken it down into much smaller, more digestible steps, and they're checking off their little lists and communicating back to us. And, I think it's really improved our relationship with our end users. So
Hey,
I think, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, no, I don't know how much you guys heard. I was talking and I noticed you might not have been hearing me.
No,
Okay.
no.
I'm sorry. So I started to cut in. Where did you, are you talking about the good old success story of state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, I'm just about to get there.
Okay, I'll let
definitely.
you go.
With this process, and of course, we were able to leverage a lot of what had been done before, a lot of what was created originally by Matt himself, and then, take it to that next level in PeopleSoft. But, 2018 was our fastest year-end close on record, and that was at year 3 of doing the PO role in PeopleSoft, which, for those of you who are probably not aware, was a big step for the state to adopt an ERP. Prior to that, we were living with a DOS-based system. So that was quite a lightning speed move for us. we centrally roll that PO data using kind of a small team across, 46 state agencies. Some of those agencies have more than one, sometimes even more than 2 business units, and we're able to do that in about a day, plus some residual cleanup saved for that Sunday. We are also, been able to get through this, kind of rec to check data cleanse within our various modules and kind of get that cross-functional teamwork going by leveraging this process and the preparation that goes through that. I mentioned earlier too about the reconciliation, which has really lended credibility, a lot of credibility to what we're doing. We're not just kind of, taking a fun weekend of rolling data, that this actually has, quite a bit of meaning for the various agencies. And so the increase in, effective communication improvements, vis-a-vis making a number of these sites public for our work breakdown structure, posting a lot of that in our work center, our messages, even the emails that we send out, and maintaining those groups, and the monthly Skype meetings that we're having now, have all just been really kind of rolled around this process. And I kid you not when I say PO Roll has absolutely brought us together and really made some major improvements for us here at the state with our customers.
Yeah, and it really has simplified over the years the routine that you guys have established with the pre-roll execution over one weekend, to having everybody on the same page when you actually do the roll, all the necessary people, which comes down to like 5-6 people on the actual roll weekend, which is remarkable for the amount of work that's been accomplished at that time, whether it's a DBN deck, development deck, but it's ultimately running batch and functional people analyzing what's happened as you go. So
yeah, tens of thousands of distribution lines, billions of dollars. And then, it comes down to at the end, okay, 16 purchase orders, or maybe it's only 6 purchase orders that actually have, any sort of identifiable error. So when you think about, out of almost 24,000 lines, to have 6 distribution lines that had, an incorrect PO roll, I mean, that's pretty amazing for us, and that makes cleanup much easier on our team.
Right. And not to mention going back to reconcile GL to KK, the way you guys do it, audit's gotta love it. So it's good. We're running out of time. We have like 1 minute. I didn't see any questions coming through the chat. If someone could unmute, if you have a pressing question, please feel free to ask. But if not, we'll have to end this meeting shortly. Okay, well, with that, Jessica, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes, absolutely. Everyone else, thanks for attending. Enjoy your day, and we'll be sending this recording out. With that, take care. Bye.
Thank you.